I was staring at the termination letter on my desk, my hands trembling not from fear, but from pure rage. The company letterhead bore the familiar logo I'd grown up seeing on Dad's shirts, his coffee mugs, even our family Christmas cards. Thompson Industries. 3 generations of sweat and sacrifice, and now my own sister had just handed me a pink slip with the coldest smile I'd ever seen. The worst part wasn't getting fired from the family business. The worst part was that she had no idea what she'd just unleashed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other Tuesday in hell. I'd been living in this cramped Capitol Hill apartment for 3 months now, ever since Jordan decided that our marriage wasn't worth fighting for and walked out with half of everything I thought mattered. The divorce papers were still sitting on my kitchen counter, a constant reminder of how quickly life can crumble. I was nursing my 3rd cup of coffee when my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Family meeting at the office. 9 a.m. sharp. Important announcement. I should have known something was wrong when I walked into the conference room and saw Rachel sitting at the head of the table, not Dad. She was wearing that navy blue power suit she'd bought right after finishing her MBA, the one she claimed made her look more authoritative. Dad sat to her right, looking older than his 68 years, his usually sharp eyes now distant and weary. The rest of the senior staff filled the remaining chairs, their faces carefully neutral in that way people get when they're about to witness something uncomfortable. "Thank you all for coming," Rachel began, her voice carrying that artificially sweet tone she used when she wanted to sound professional. "Dad has an important announcement to make." She gestured toward him with a theatrical flourish, like she was presenting the main act at a circus. Dad cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes completely. "After 39 years of building Thompson Industries from the ground up, I've decided it's time to step back and let the next generation take over. Effective immediately, Rachel will be assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I'd been working at Thompson Industries since I was 16, starting in the warehouse during summer breaks, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. I'd climbed my way to Vice President of Operations, managing our entire supply chain and overseeing the daily operations that kept our $50 million company running smoothly. Rachel, meanwhile, had worked here for exactly 18 months after spending 5 years in consulting, coming in whenever it was convenient and leaving early for yoga classes. "Congratulations, Rachel," I managed to say, though the words tasted like ash in my mouth. Around the table, the other executives offered polite applause and forced smiles. Marcus Williams, our longest-serving department head, caught my eye and gave me a subtle shake of his head. He'd been with the company for 15 years and knew exactly how much work I'd put into keeping things running, especially during Dad's recent health scares. Rachel beamed at the recognition, clearly savoring her moment of triumph. "Thank you, everyone. I know this is a big change, but I'm excited about the future of Thompson Industries. We're going to be implementing some new strategies, streamlining operations, and making some necessary adjustments to ensure we remain competitive in today's market." The corporate buzzwords rolled off her tongue like she'd been practicing them in front of a mirror. I'd heard her use the same phrases during family dinners, talking about her consulting projects with the confidence of someone who'd read all the right business books but had never actually built anything from scratch. "I'd like to schedule individual meetings with each department head over the next few days," she continued. "We need to assess our current personnel and determine where we can optimize our human resources." Human resources. She was talking about our employees like they were spreadsheet entries, not people who had families to feed and mortgages to pay. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, people who trusted me to look out for their interests when corporate decisions were being made. After the meeting, I lingered in the conference room, hoping to catch Dad alone, But Rachel was faster, linking her arm through his and guiding him toward his office with the possessive grip of someone marking their territory. "Don't worry, Alex," she called over her shoulder. "We'll talk soon." The way she said it made my stomach turn. There was something predatory in her tone, like a cat that had just cornered a mouse and was taking its time deciding how to play with it before the kill. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on my regular responsibilities, but concentration was impossible. Every email, every phone call, every operational decision felt meaningless when I knew my sister was probably in Dad's office right now, planning God knows what kind of changes. The employees in my department kept shooting me sympathetic looks, like they were attending a funeral and didn't know what to say to the grieving widow. Around 4 p.m., Diana Park from HR knocked on my office door. Diana had been with the company for 8 years, and we'd always had a good working relationship. She looked uncomfortable, clutching a manila folder against her chest like it was a shield. "Hey Alex, do you have a minute?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sure, what's up?" She sat down reluctantly, setting the folder on my desk but keeping her hands protectively over it. "I need to talk to you about something, but I want you to know that this conversation never happened, okay?" My pulse quickened. What kind of conversation? Diana glanced toward my office door, then leaned forward and lowered her voice. "Rachel called me into her office about an hour ago. She wants me to start building a case for terminating you." The words hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. "A case? What kind of case?" "She's asking me to document any performance issues, attendance problems, anything that could justify letting you go. She specifically mentioned your recent divorce and suggested that it might be affecting your work performance." I felt heat rising in my cheeks. My divorce had been finalized 2 weeks ago, and while it had been emotionally draining, I'd never let it interfere with my professional responsibilities. If anything, throwing myself into work had been the only thing keeping me sane during the worst period of my life. "Diana, you know that's not true. My performance reviews have been stellar for the past 3 years running." She nodded quickly. "I know, Alex. That's why I'm here. Your personnel file is clean, and everyone in operations speaks highly of your leadership. But Rachel is the CEO now, and she's making it clear that she wants you gone." I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. "Did she say why?" Diana hesitated, then sighed. "She said the company needs fresh leadership in all key positions, and that family dynamics were complicating the business structure. She wants to bring in outside talent who can implement her new vision without being influenced by the old way of doing things." The old way of doing things. The way that had built Thompson Industries from a small Denver startup into a regional powerhouse. The way that had provided jobs for 200 families and generated millions in revenue. But apparently, that wasn't good enough for Rachel's MBA-trained sensibilities. "How long do I have?" I asked. "She wants the documentation ready by Friday. I'm supposed to present her with a complete termination package, including severance calculations and a transition plan." 3 days. My sister was planning to fire me in 3 days, and she was asking HR to manufacture a justification for it. I thought about all the late nights I'd spent in this office, all the crisis situations I'd managed, all the relationships I'd built with our suppliers and customers. None of it mattered to Rachel. I was just an obstacle to her grand vision, a reminder of the old guard that needed to be swept away. "Thank you for telling me this, Diana."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"I really appreciate the heads up." She stood to leave, then turned back. "Alex, I've been thinking about updating my resume lately. This new management style doesn't really align with my values." She left the folder on my desk. "That's a copy of your personnel file. You might want to review it." After Diana left, I sat alone in my office as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. The building was getting quieter as the day shift employees headed home to their family. their normal lives, their sense of security that could be ripped away at any moment by someone who viewed them as line items on a budget spreadsheet. I opened Diana's folder and flipped through my employment history. 15 years of performance reviews, commendation letters, project completion reports, and financial impact statements. There wasn't a single negative mark in the entire file. I'd increased operational efficiency by 12% over the past 2 years, renegotiated supplier contracts that saved the company over $300,000 annually, and implemented safety protocols that had reduced workplace accidents by 40%. But none of that mattered to Rachel. What mattered was that I represented the past, and she wanted to start fresh with people who owed their loyalty to her alone. I was a threat to her authority, simply by existing, simply by being the person who actually understood how this company functioned on a day-to-day basis. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. It was Marcus Williams. "Alex, you got a minute to talk?" "Not here in the building, somewhere private." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Cherry Creek, far enough from the office that we wouldn't run into any other Thompson Industries employees. Marcus was already waiting when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee and a grim expression on his weathered face. "I've been thinking about that meeting this morning," he said without preamble. "Something doesn't feel right about this whole situation." I slid into the seat across from him. "What do you mean?" Marcus had been Dad's right-hand man for over a decade, managing our largest manufacturing contracts and maintaining relationships with our biggest clients. He was in his mid-50s, the kind of steady, reliable presence that made customers trust us with their business. If Marcus was concerned, there was probably good reason. "Your dad didn't look like a man who was ready to retire," Marcus said quietly. "He looked like a man who'd been backed into a corner. And Rachel, she's been asking a lot of questions lately about our client contracts, our financial projections, things that seemed innocent enough at the time, but now make me wonder what she's really planning." "What kind of questions?" "Specific stuff about our profit margins, which contracts are most lucrative, which employees are highest paid, that sort of thing." I thought she was just trying to learn the business, but now I'm starting to think she was conducting some kind of audit. I sipped my coffee, trying to piece together the timeline. "When did this start?" "About 3 weeks ago, right after your divorce was finalized." She started scheduling these informal meetings with different department heads, calling them orientation sessions. But the questions she asked were very targeted, very strategic. 3 weeks ago, right around the time Jordan and I had signed our final divorce papers, and I'd been at my most emotionally vulnerable, while I was dealing with the collapse of my marriage, Rachel had been quietly positioning herself for a corporate takeover. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." He leaned forward. "Shoot. Do you think Dad really wanted to step down, or do you think Rachel forced his hand somehow?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup, like it might contain answers. "Your dad's been under a lot of pressure lately. The divorce proceedings, some health issues he's been trying to keep private, some financial concerns about the business. Rachel's been very supportive during all of that, very involved in helping him manage things." "What kind of financial concerns?" "Cash flow issues mainly. We had that big client default on their payments 6 months ago, and it created some temporary liquidity problems. Nothing catastrophic, but it required some careful management to keep everything balanced. Rachel helped negotiate a line of credit to cover the shortfall." I felt a chill run down my spine. A line of credit. I wasn't involved in those negotiations. That's what surprised me. Usually you handle all our financial arrangements with the banks, but Rachel said she had connections from her consulting days, people who could get us better terms than our usual lenders. This was news to me. As VP of Operations, I should have been involved in any major financial decisions, especially something as significant as securing emergency credit. The fact that Rachel had handled it independently, without involving me or even informing me, suggested that she'd been planning this takeover for months. Did Dad seem comfortable with those arrangements? Marcus shrugged. He seemed relieved, honestly, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Rachel made it sound like she'd solved all his problems with one phone call. We talked for another hour, piecing together a timeline of Rachel's gradual infiltration into the company's decision-making processes. What emerged was a picture of someone who had been strategically positioning herself for this moment, using Dad's stress and my personal crisis as opportunities to insert herself into increasingly important roles. By the time I drove home to my empty apartment that evening, I had a clearer picture of what had happened. Rachel hadn't just been appointed CEO because Dad wanted to retire. She'd orchestrated a careful campaign to make herself indispensable, while simultaneously undermining my position in the company. And now she was moving to eliminate me entirely, removing the last obstacle to her complete control over Thompson Industries. But what Rachel didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I had been keeping detailed records of everything. Every financial transaction, every client interaction, every operational decision that had been made over the past 5 years. I had backup copies of contracts, correspondence, performance data, everything that documented how the company actually functioned versus how it appeared on paper. More importantly, I had something Rachel would never have access to: the trust and loyalty of the people who actually did the work. The warehouse supervisors, the production managers, the customer service representatives, the truck drivers who delivered our products, the maintenance crews who kept our equipment running. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, people who knew that I'd always fought for fair wages, safe working conditions, and job security. Rachel saw Thompson Industries as a business to be optimized, a collection of assets and liabilities that could be rearranged to maximize profitability. I saw it as a community, a place where people built careers and supported their families, where relationships mattered as much as revenue. That night, lying in my bed in the apartment that still felt temporary even after 3 months, I made a decision. Rachel wanted to fire me, to erase 15 years of dedication and expertise, with a pink slip and a manufactured justification. She thought she could steamroll over me the same way she'd apparently manipulated Dad into handing over control of the company. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. The betrayal deepens. Thursday morning arrived, with the kind of gray Denver sky that matched my mood perfectly. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with everything Marcus had told me and the implications of Rachel's systematic takeover. But I forced myself to maintain my normal routine, arriving at the office at 7:30 as I had every day for the past decade. If Rachel wanted to manufacture a case against me, I wasn't going to give her any ammunition by suddenly changing my work habits. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt different now, like I was ascending to my own execution. When the doors opened, I was surprised to see Rachel already in Dad's office, going through filing cabinets with the methodical precision of someone conducting an inventory. She looked up when she heard the elevator ding, giving me a wave that was equal parts cheerful and predatory. I settled into my office and tried to focus on the morning reports, but concentration was nearly impossible. Every phone call, every email, every operational decision felt hollow when I knew my time here was being measured in hours, rather than years. Around 9 a.m., my assistant knocked on the door with a concerned expression. "Alex, Rachel wants to see you in the CEO office," she said. "It's urgent." The CEO office, not Dad's office anymore, but Rachel's domain now. I straightened my tie and walked down the hall, noticing how several employees quickly looked away when I passed their desks. Word travels fast in a company with 200 people, and everyone could sense that something significant was happening in the executive ranks. Rachel was sitting behind Dad's massive oak desk, looking almost comically small in the oversized leather chair that had been his command center for nearly 4 decades. She'd already rearranged the office, moving family photos to a side table and replacing them with her framed MBA diploma and a collection of business books with titles like Disrupting Traditional Industries and Leading Through Transformation. "Alex, thanks for coming. Please, have a seat." I sat in one of the chairs facing the desk, the same chairs where I'd sat countless times over the years, discussing everything from production schedules to family vacation plans. But now there was an invisible barrier between us, a formality that had never existed before. "I wanted to talk to you about the direction we're taking Thompson Industries," she began, folding her hands on the desk in a pose she'd probably practiced during her MBA program. "As you know, the business landscape is changing rapidly, and we need to adapt or risk becoming obsolete." I nodded politely, waiting for her to get to the point. Rachel had always been fond of lengthy preambles, especially when she was about to deliver bad news. "I've been conducting a comprehensive review of our operations, and I've identified several areas where we need to make strategic changes. Unfortunately, some of these changes will require difficult personnel decisions." Here it comes, I thought, the corporate euphemisms for firing people who've dedicated their careers to building something meaningful. "Our operational structure is outdated," she continued. "We have too many layers of management, too much redundancy in our decision-making processes. We need to streamline our leadership team to create clearer lines of authority and accountability." "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Rachel leaned back in the chair, trying to project an image of executive authority. "I'm restructuring the entire company. We're eliminating several VP positions and consolidating their responsibilities under a smaller group of department heads who report directly to me. It's a more efficient model, and it will reduce our overhead costs significantly. And my position, your position, is being eliminated, effective Friday." I know this comes as a shock, but I want you to understand that this isn't personal. It's simply a business decision based on what's best for the company's future. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 15 years of building relationships, solving problems, and growing the business, dismissed as overhead costs that needed to be reduced. I felt a familiar rage building in my chest, the same anger that had sustained me through the worst parts of my divorce. "I see. And what happens to my responsibilities? The supplier relationships, the production schedules, the quality control systems." Rachel waved her hand dismissively. "Those functions will be distributed among the remaining department heads. Marcus Williams will take over supplier relations, and we're bringing in a consultant to handle production optimization. The transition should be seamless." Seamless. She actually believed that 15 years of institutional knowledge could be seamlessly transferred to people who had never negotiated a contract extension at 3 a.m. or solved a production crisis that threatened to shut down our entire operation. She had no idea how many fires I'd put out behind the scenes, how many relationships I'd built that kept our business running smoothly when everything else was falling apart. "What about severance?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, we're prepared to offer you a generous package." She slid a folder across the desk. 6 months' salary, continuation of your health benefits for the same period, and positive references for any future employment opportunities. I opened the folder and scanned the documents. The severance offer was decent by industry standards, but it represented a fraction of what I'd contributed to the company over the years. More importantly, it came with a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working for any competitors in our industry for 2 years. "This non-compete seems rather broad," I observed. "It's standard practice when dealing with executive-level terminations. We need to protect our trade secrets and client relationships." Trade secrets and client relationships that I had largely developed and maintained. The irony was suffocating. Rachel was firing me, and then demanding that I sign a document preventing me from using my own expertise elsewhere. I'll need some time to review this with my attorney. Rachel's smile tightened slightly. Of course, but I'll need your answer by tomorrow morning. We want to make the announcement to the staff on Friday, and we need to have all the paperwork finalized before then. I stood to leave, clutching the severance package like evidence of a crime. Is Dad aware of this decision? For the first time, Rachel looked uncomfortable. Dad trusts my judgment on personnel matters. He's focusing on his retirement plans and doesn't want to be involved in day-to-day operational decisions anymore. Translation: she hadn't told him she was firing me, or she'd presented it in a way that made it sound like a mutual decision. Either way, Dad was being kept out of the loop on the dissolution of everything he'd built. I walked back to my office in a daze, nodding automatically at employees who greeted me in the hallway. Behind my closed door, I sat staring at the severance documents, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Not only was Rachel firing me, she was doing it in a way that would make it nearly impossible for me to work in the industry again. The non-compete clause was particularly insidious. It covered any company that manufactured or distributed industrial equipment within a 500-mile radius of Denver. Essentially, it would force me to either leave the region entirely or find work in a completely different field. At 42 years old, starting over in a new industry, with the stigma of being fired from the family business hanging over my head. But as I read through the documents more carefully, I noticed something interesting. The non-compete clause was mutual. If I agreed not to work for competitors, Thompson Industries was agreeing not to interfere with any business ventures I might pursue outside the industrial equipment industry. It was standard legal language, probably copied from a template, but it created an interesting loophole. Around noon, Marcus Williams appeared in my doorway, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Not here. Meet me at that diner on Colfax in 20 minutes. The diner was one of those old-school places that had been serving coffee and pie to Denver locals since the 1960s. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that could have curdled milk. "They called me into a meeting this morning," he said without preamble. "Rachel and some consultant she's brought in from her old firm. They want me to take over your responsibilities, effective Monday." I slid into the booth across from him. "What did you tell them?" "I told them I'd need to see a detailed transition plan and understand what kind of support I'd have. But Alex, they have no idea what you actually do." This consultant, some kid who looks like he's barely out of college, was talking about optimizing workflows and implementing lean management principles. He used the phrase synergistic efficiencies 3 times in 10 minutes. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Let me guess, he's never actually worked in manufacturing. According to his resume, he's an expert in organizational restructuring and process optimization, which apparently means he's read some books and worked on a few projects where they fired a bunch of people and called it innovation. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Alex, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I did some digging. That line of credit Rachel arranged for the company, it's not what she claimed it was." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" I called our contact at First National, the bank we've used for business loans for the past 20 years. They told me we never applied for emergency credit. So I started making some other calls, and it turns out Rachel arranged a private loan from an investment firm in Chicago. The terms are terrible, Alex. We're paying almost double what we would have gotten from a traditional lender. Why would she do that? That's what I can't figure out. Unless Marcus paused, staring into his coffee, unless she wanted to put the company in a financially vulnerable position for some reason. The implications of what he was suggesting started to sink in. "You think she's planning to sell?" "I think she's planning something. The loan terms include provisions that would make it very easy for the lender to take control of the company if we default on payments.
And with the operational changes she's planning, the staff reductions, the elimination of experienced management, default becomes a lot more likely. I felt like I was looking at a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces were finally starting to form a recognizable picture. Rachel hadn't just orchestrated a takeover of Thompson Industries, she'd positioned the company for failure, set up financial arrangements that would benefit outside investors, and was systematically eliminating anyone who might understand enough about the business to interfere with her plans. Marcus, I need you to do something for me, but I need you to be very careful about it. He nodded grimly. Whatever you need, I want you to document everything. Every conversation you have with Rachel or her consultant, every change they ask you to implement, every decision that seems questionable. Keep detailed records, but don't store them on company servers. Use your personal email, keep copies at home, whatever it takes. You think they're planning something illegal. I think they're planning something that's going to destroy everything Dad built, and I want to make sure we have evidence when it all falls apart. We spent another hour going over the details of Rachel's restructuring plan. The more Marcus told me, the clearer it became that this wasn't just corporate incompetence. This was a deliberate dismantling of everything that had made Thompson Industries successful, disguised as business optimization. That afternoon, I called my divorce attorney, Jennifer Walsh, and asked her to recommend someone who specialized in employment law. She referred me to a firm downtown that dealt with executive terminations and non-compete disputes. The attorney, David Chen, agreed to see me that evening after regular business hours. Chen's office was in one of those sleek downtown towers that symbolize New Denver, all glass and steel and expensive views of the mountains. It was a different world from the practical functional spaces where most of Thompson Industries' business was conducted, but it felt
appropriate for the conversation I needed to have. I've reviewed the severance package you sent over, Chen said, spreading the documents across his desk. On the surface, it looks fairly standard, but there are several unusual provisions that concern me, such as the non-compete clause is extraordinarily broad, almost punitive in its scope. Most courts would probably find it unenforceable, but fighting it would be expensive and time-consuming. More concerning is the way your termination is being structured. He pulled out a highlighter and marked several sections of the agreement. They're terminating you without cause, which means you're entitled to severance. But they're requiring you to sign this agreement within 24 hours, which doesn't give you adequate time to review it properly. That suggests they want to rush you into signing before you have a chance to understand the full implications. What kind of implications? Well, for starters, signing this agreement would waive your right to challenge the termination or pursue any claims against the company. But more importantly, it would prevent you from accessing certain information about the company's financial situation that you might otherwise be entitled to as a former executive. Chen leaned back in his chair, studying my face carefully. Alex, can I ask you something off the record? Do you have any reason to believe that your termination is connected to something larger than just corporate restructuring? I thought about my conversation with Marcus about the suspicious loan arrangements, about Rachel's systematic elimination of experienced employees. I think my sister is setting up the company to fail and she wants me out of the way before anyone realizes what's happening. In that case, I strongly advise you not to sign this agreement, at least not without additional protections and a more thorough review of your rights. What do you recommend? Let me draft a counter-proposal. We'll accept the severance package but remove the non-compete clause and add provisions that protect your access to information about the company's operations. We'll also extend the review period to something more reasonable, say 30 days instead of 24 hours. Will Rachel accept those changes? Chen smiled grimly. Probably not. But her reaction will tell us a lot about what she's really trying to accomplish. I left Chen's office feeling more confident than I had since this nightmare began. For the first time, I had a plan that went beyond simply absorbing Rachel's attacks and trying to survive them. I was going to fight back, and I was going to do it strategically. That night, I sat in my apartment going through boxes of documents I'd brought home over the years: financial reports, client contracts, employee performance reviews, correspondence with suppliers and customers. 15 years of institutional knowledge that existed nowhere else, not in any computer system or filing cabinet at Thompson Industries. Rachel thought she could erase my contribution to the company with a termination letter and a severance check. She had no idea that I possessed detailed information about every aspect of the business, information that would be crucial if anyone ever wanted to investigate how a successful company had been driven into the ground by incompetent management. But more than that, I had something: Rachel would never have the respect and loyalty of the people who actually did the work. The production supervisors who trusted me to fight for their budgets, the customer service representatives who knew I'd always back them up when clients were being unreasonable, the maintenance crews who appreciated that I understood the importance of keeping equipment properly serviced. These weren't just employees to me, they were colleagues, people I'd worked alongside during late-night crisis situations and celebrated with during successful project completions. Many of them had been with the company for decades, and they understood the difference between someone who cared about the business and someone who was just looking to optimize quarterly numbers. Friday morning would bring Rachel's carefully orchestrated announcement about my termination, followed by whatever spin she'd prepared to explain why eliminating experienced leadership was good for the company. The remaining staff would be told about exciting new opportunities and streamlined operations and all the other corporate buzzwords that made downsizing sound like innovation. But what Rachel didn't understand was that reputation and relationships matter more than organizational charts. The people who kept Thompson Industries running day after day weren't going to be fooled by MBA jargon and consultant speak. They were going to notice when production schedules started falling behind, when supplier relationships began deteriorating, when the quality control systems I'd developed over years of trial and error started breaking down. And when that happened, when the carefully constructed facade of Rachel's business transformation began to crumble, they were going to remember who had actually understood how to make things work. I spent Friday morning cleaning out my office, boxing up 15 years of accumulated memories and professional achievements, photos from company retreats, awards for safety improvements and cost reductions, thank you notes from satisfied customers, performance reviews that documented my contributions to every aspect of the business. Rachel had scheduled the all-hands meeting for 10 a.m., probably calculating that announcing my departure on a Friday would minimize disruption and give people the weekend to process the news. She underestimated how much the staff valued stability and continuity, especially during uncertain times. The meeting was held in the main conference room, with employees packed in so tightly that some were standing along the walls. Rachel stood at the front of the room with her consultant beside her, both of them wearing the kind of confident expressions that executives practice in front of mirrors. "Thank you all for coming," Rachel began. "I know this meeting was called on short notice, but I wanted to share some exciting news about Thompson Industries' future direction." Exciting news. She was actually going to frame my termination as exciting news. As you know, we're undergoing a significant transformation to position ourselves for continued growth and success in an increasingly competitive market. Part of that transformation involves streamlining our leadership structure to create more efficient decision-making processes. The consultant nodded approvingly, like he was grading Rachel's performance on corporate communication techniques. "Effective today, we're implementing a new organizational structure that will eliminate redundancies and improve our operational efficiency. Unfortunately, this means that some positions are being eliminated, including the Vice President of Operations role currently held by Alex Thompson." A murmur went through the crowd.
I saw Marcus Williams shake his head in disgust, and several other longtime employees exchange troubled looks. These weren't people who were easily impressed by buzzword-heavy explanations for firing competent managers. I want to emphasize that this decision has nothing to do with Alex's performance, which has been exemplary throughout their tenure with the company. This is purely a strategic business decision designed to optimize our organizational structure. Pure corporate double-speak. Fire someone for being exemplary, but call it optimization. I wondered if Rachel actually believed her own rhetoric or if she knew she was insulting everyone's intelligence. Alex's responsibilities will be distributed among our remaining department heads, supported by external consultants who specialize in operational excellence. This will give us access to industry best practices and cutting-edge methodologies that will drive our continued success. Translation: we're firing someone who understands our business and replacing them with consultants who've never worked in our industry but charge 3 times as much. The questions from the staff were predictably skeptical. How would client relationships be maintained? Who would handle supplier negotiations? What about the quality control systems that had reduced defects by 30% over the past 3 years? Rachel had rehearsed answers for everything, all variations on the theme that change was necessary, and the new structure would be more efficient. But I could see in the employees' faces that they weren't buying it. These were practical people who understood the difference between genuine improvement and corporate restructuring for its own sake. After the meeting, I was approached by a steady stream of employees offering condolences and expressing concern about the company's direction. Many of them asked if I was planning to start my own business, if there might be opportunities to work with me in the future. I gave diplomatic answers, but I could see that Rachel's announcement had accomplished the opposite of what she'd intended. Instead of reassuring the staff about the company's future, she'd created anxiety about job security and skepticism about her leadership abilities. Instead of positioning herself as a visionary leader implementing necessary changes, she'd revealed herself as someone who was willing to sacrifice experienced employees for theoretical efficiencies. By afternoon, I'd finished packing my office and said my goodbyes to the people who had been my colleagues for over a decade. As I carried my boxes to the elevator, I passed Rachel's office and saw her in an animated conversation with her consultant, probably planning the next phase of their transformation strategy. She looked up as I passed and gave me a smile that was equal parts sympathetic and triumphant. In her mind, she'd successfully eliminated a potential obstacle to her vision for Thompson Industries. She'd removed someone who might have questioned her decisions or interfered with her plans. What she didn't realize was that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her professional life. By firing me, she'd eliminated the one person who might have been willing to work with her, who might have helped her understand the complexities of running a manufacturing business, who might have prevented the disaster that her ignorance and arrogance were about to unleash. But I was no longer her brother trying to help her succeed. I was now her former employee with detailed knowledge of every aspect of the business, extensive relationships throughout the industry, and absolutely no obligation to protect her from the consequences of her own incompetence. Rachel thought she'd won by getting me out of her way. She had no idea that the real battle was just beginning. The strategic positioning the weekend after my termination felt like the calm before a storm. I spent Saturday morning at a coffee shop in Cherry Creek reviewing the counter-proposal that David Chen had drafted in response to Rachel's severance agreement. The document was a masterpiece of legal precision, politely declining most of the restrictions Rachel wanted to impose while accepting the financial terms of the severance package. The key changes were subtle but significant. Chen had removed the broad non-compete clause entirely, arguing that it was unenforceable and unnecessarily restrictive. He'd also added language protecting my right to access company information related to projects I'd managed, relationships I'd developed, and systems I'd implemented over my 15-year tenure. Most importantly, he'd included a provision stating that my acceptance of the severance package did not constitute an admission that my termination was justified or that I waived any rights to challenge the circumstances surrounding my dismissal. It was legal language that gave me room to maneuver if Rachel's restructuring plans proved to be more destructive than she anticipated. I spent Sunday afternoon at my laptop, creating detailed documentation of everything I knew about Thompson Industries operations. Client histories, supplier relationships, production processes, quality control systems, financial patterns, employee capabilities. A comprehensive manual that could only have been written by someone who'd been intimately involved in every aspect of the business for over a decade. This wasn't industrial espionage or trade secret theft. This was institutional knowledge, the kind of understanding that develops over years of solving problems, building relationships, and learning from both successes and failures. Rachel could hire all the consultants she wanted, but she couldn't purchase the experience that came from actually doing the work day after day. Monday morning arrived with a phone call from Marcus Williams. He sounded exhausted, like he'd spent the weekend wrestling with a difficult decision. "Alex, I need to tell you something, and I need to tell you fast because I don't know how long I have before they start monitoring my communications." "What happened?" "They brought in a team of consultants this morning. Not just the kid from Friday, but a whole group of them. They're conducting what they call an operational audit, which seems to involve questioning everything we do and why we do it." I settled into my kitchen chair with a cup of coffee, preparing for what sounded like it was going to be a long conversation. "They started with the supplier contracts you negotiated over the past 3 years. The consultants are recommending that we renegotiate everything to get better pricing, but they don't understand the relationships involved. Some of these suppliers have been working with us for decades. They give us priority treatment, flexible payment terms, quality guarantees that aren't written into the contracts but are based on trust and mutual respect." "What did you tell them?" I tried to explain, but they're not interested in hearing about relationship-based business practices. Everything has to be quantifiable, measurable, optimized according to their spreadsheet models. They actually used the phrase "eliminate emotional decision-making from the procurement process." I could picture the scene: Marcus, with his decades of experience and practical wisdom, trying to explain complex business relationships to consultants who saw everything in terms of data points and efficiency metrics. It would be like trying to explain the color blue to someone who had only ever seen in black and white. "It gets worse," Marcus continued. "They're planning to centralize all purchasing decisions through their recommended vendor management system. Instead of department heads choosing suppliers based on specific needs and relationships, everything will go through a standardized bidding process managed by software. That's going to destroy our supplier relationships." I know that, and you know that, but they see it as eliminating bias and ensuring optimal pricing. They have no idea that optimal pricing means nothing if the supplier doesn't deliver on time, or if the quality is inconsistent, or if they don't provide the kind of service support we need when problems arise. Marcus paused and I could hear the frustration in his voice. "Alex, they're going to ruin everything we've built here. And the worst part is Rachel thinks this is all brilliant innovation. She's walking around talking about how we're finally going to operate like a modern business instead of relying on outdated practices. How long before the changes are implemented? They want everything in place within 60 days. New supplier contracts, new procurement systems, new performance metrics, everything. It's like they're trying to rebuild the entire operational structure of the company in 2 months. I knew from experience that major operational changes needed to be implemented gradually, with careful attention to maintaining continuity and preserving critical relationships. Trying to transform everything simultaneously was a recipe for chaos, but apparently Rachel's consultants believed that gradual change was inefficient. Marcus, I need you to be very careful about how you handle this. Document everything but don't openly resist their recommendations. Let them implement their changes and keep detailed records of the results. You think this is going to fail? I think this is going to fail spectacularly, and when it does, people are going to want to understand what went wrong. Your documentation could be crucial for protecting the company and the employees who depend on it. After hanging up with Marcus, I spent the morning researching Rachel's consulting firm and the methodologies they typically used. What I found was both illuminating and deeply troubling. They specialized in what they called rapid organizational transformation, which seemed to involve implementing dramatic changes as quickly as possible without regard for industry-specific considerations or existing relationships. Their case studies were impressive at first glance, featuring companies that had reduced costs and increased efficiency through their restructuring programs. But when I dug deeper, I found that many of their success stories had experienced significant problems after the initial implementation period. Higher employee turnover, deteriorating customer relationships, quality control issues that took months or years to resolve. The pattern was consistent: short-term improvements in measurable metrics, followed by longer-term problems that were harder to quantify but ultimately more damaging to the business. It was the kind of consulting approach that looked great in quarterly reports, but created serious problems for anyone who had to operate the business on a daily basis. Tuesday afternoon brought a call from Diana Park in HR. She sounded nervous, speaking quietly like she was afraid of being overheard. "Alex, I need to talk to you about something but not over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere private?" We agreed to meet at a restaurant in Highlands, far enough from Thompson Industries that we wouldn't encounter any other employees. Diana was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall and an untouched glass of wine in front of her. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," she began without preamble, "but I thought you should know what's been happening since Friday." "What kind of things?" 3 more employees have submitted their resignations since your termination was announced. All of them experienced people, all of them citing concerns about the company's new direction. And that's just the official resignations. I've had at least a dozen other people asking me about job opportunities elsewhere, wanting to know if I could provide references. This was worse than I'd expected. Losing experienced employees during a major reorganization would make Rachel's transformation even more difficult to manage successfully. "It's not just the resignations," Diana continued. "The morale in the building is terrible. People are scared about their job security, confused about the new reporting structures, frustrated with the consultants who keep asking them to justify everything they do." She leaned forward, lowering her voice even further. "Alex, I've been in HR for 8 years, and I've never seen employee confidence drop this fast. Usually when companies go through reorganizations, there's at least some optimism about new opportunities or improved processes. But this feels different. It feels like people are watching something valuable being destroyed." What's Rachel's reaction to all this? That's what's really concerning. She seems completely oblivious to the staff reaction. When I mentioned the resignations and the morale issues, she said it was normal for some people to resist change, and that we'd be better off without employees who couldn't adapt to innovation. Diana shook her head in disbelief. She actually said that losing experienced employees would create opportunities for fresh thinking and new perspectives. Like 15 years of operational knowledge is something we should be happy to throw away. I thought about my own experience trying to train new employees over the years. Even the most capable and motivated people needed months to understand the complexities of our business, the relationships with suppliers and customers, the unwritten rules and procedures that kept everything running smoothly. The idea that you could simply replace experienced employees with fresh thinking showed a fundamental misunderstanding of how manufacturing businesses actually operated. Diana, what do you think is going to happen? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her wine glass like it might contain answers to questions she was afraid to ask. Honestly, I think we're heading for a disaster. The consultants are making changes faster than people can adapt to them, the experienced employees are leaving, and Rachel is so convinced that she's modernizing the business that she's not paying attention to the warning signs. How long before the problems become obvious? If I had to guess, I'd say we'll start seeing serious operational issues within 30 to 60 days. Quality problems, delivery delays, customer complaints, that sort of thing. And once that starts, it's going to snowball quickly. Diana paused, then looked directly at me with an expression that was part hope and part desperation. Alex, I know this is a lot to ask, but if things get as bad as I think they're going to get, would you consider coming back to help fix them? Not necessarily permanently, but just long enough to prevent the company from completely imploding. The question caught me off guard. After everything that had happened, after being fired for no legitimate reason and treated like an obstacle to progress, the idea of returning to save Rachel from her own mistakes seemed almost surreal. Diana, I appreciate the thought, but I don't think Rachel would be interested in having me back under any circumstances. You might be surprised. Pride is one thing, but if the company starts losing money and clients, practical concerns tend to take precedence. I didn't respond directly, but Diana's question planted a seed of an idea that would grow over the following days. What if the solution to Rachel's incompetence wasn't to stand aside and watch the company fail, but to position myself as the only person who could prevent that failure? Wednesday morning brought news that confirmed my worst fears about Rachel's management approach. Marcus called to tell me that our largest client, a manufacturing company in Wyoming that accounted for almost 20% of Thompson Industries' annual revenue, had received notice that their supplier contracts were being renegotiated according to new efficiency standards. They're furious, Alex. I spent 4 years building that relationship, working through quality issues, adjusting delivery schedules to meet their production needs, providing custom solutions that aren't available from other suppliers. And now some consultant who's never met them wants to treat them like just another line item in a procurement database. What did they say? They said they're not interested in renegotiating. They want to continue working under the existing contract terms, with the same level of personalized service they've been receiving. If Thompson Industries can't provide that, they'll find a supplier who can. 20% of annual revenue. If Rachel lost that client, because of her consultant's efficiency optimization, it would create exactly the kind of financial pressure that could trigger default on the high-interest loan she'd arranged. The irony was perfect. Her attempts to optimize profitability could end up destroying the company's financial stability. Marcus, what did you tell them? I told them I'd relay their concerns to management and see if we could work out a solution. But honestly, I don't think Rachel or her consultants understand how serious this is. They seem to think that customers should be grateful for our improved efficiency, not concerned about changes to established relationships. That afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call from Kevin Brooks, the company's attorney. Kevin had been Thompson Industries' legal counsel for over a decade, handling everything from contract negotiations to employment disputes. His call was the first direct contact I'd had with anyone in company leadership since my termination. Alex, I hope you don't mind me calling you directly, but I wanted to discuss the severance agreement modifications your attorney proposed. Of course. What are your thoughts? Honestly, I think your counter-proposal is reasonable. The original non-compete clause was probably unenforceable anyway, and the other changes you're requesting are fairly standard protections for executive-level separations. Kevin paused, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. However, Rachel has asked me to reject your modifications and insist on the original terms. She seems to believe that accepting any changes would set a bad precedent for future personnel decisions. What do you think about that position? Between you and me, I think it's unnecessarily rigid. Good faith negotiations on severance agreements usually benefit everyone involved. Trying to force terms that might not hold up in court just creates unnecessary legal exposure for the company. Kevin's professional opinion aligned with what David Chen had told me about Rachel's approach being unusually aggressive. Most companies wanted to resolve executive terminations quickly and amicably to avoid the costs and complications of prolonged disputes. Kevin, can I ask you something off the record? Sure. Do you think Rachel understands the legal and financial risks of the changes she's implementing? There was a long pause before Kevin answered. I think Rachel is very confident in her business school training and the advice she's receiving from her consultants. Whether that confidence is justified remains to be seen. It was a diplomatically worded way of saying that Rachel was making decisions without fully understanding their consequences. But Kevin couldn't say that directly given his professional obligations to the company. Thursday brought the news I'd been expecting but hoping to avoid. Marcus called to tell me that the Wyoming client had formally terminated their contract with Thompson Industries, effective in 30 days. They were moving their business to a competitor who could provide the kind of personalized service they required. Rachel's reaction was unbelievable. Marcus said, when I told her what happened, she said it proved that we were better off without clients who couldn't appreciate modern business practices. She actually seemed relieved that we wouldn't have to deal with their special requirements anymore. What about the revenue impact? I tried to explain that losing 20% of our business would create serious cash flow problems, especially with the loan payments we're now making. But the consultants assured her that we'd replace that revenue with new clients who would be more aligned with our optimized service offerings. The disconnect between Rachel's theoretical business knowledge and practical operational reality was becoming more obvious by the day. In business school case studies, losing demanding clients might seem like an opportunity to focus on more profitable accounts. In the real world, losing a major client created immediate financial pressure that could cascade the hidden power revealed. The call came at 6:30 on a Friday morning 3 weeks after my termination. I was sitting in my kitchen, still in my pajamas, trying to decide whether to start job hunting or take some time to figure out my next move. The number on my phone was one I didn't recognize, but something about the early hour made me answer anyway. Alex Thompson. The voice was crisp, professional with a slight accent I couldn't place. Speaking. My name is Victoria Chen, I'm a partner at Meridian Capital Management in Chicago. I was hoping we could arrange a meeting to discuss a business opportunity that might interest you. Meridian Capital Management. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't immediately place where I'd heard it. What kind of business opportunity? I'd prefer to discuss the details in person if possible. Would you be available to meet in Denver sometime this week? I'm planning to be in the area on other business, and this conversation would be worth your time. There was something about her tone that suggested this wasn't a typical job recruitment call. Victoria Chen sounded like someone who was used to dealing with significant business decisions, the kind of person who didn't waste time on trivial matters. Can you give me some context about what this involves? Let's just say that your recent departure from Thompson Industries has created some interesting possibilities that we'd like to explore with you. I believe you'll find our proposal quite compelling.
Agreed to meet her for lunch on Wednesday at a restaurant in Cherry Creek. The location she suggested was upscale but not flashy, the kind of place where serious business conversations happened over expensive wine and carefully prepared food. After hanging up, I spent some time trying to figure out who Victoria Chen was and what Meridian Capital Management might want with me. What I found was both impressive and slightly intimidating. Meridian was a private investment firm that specialized in acquiring and restructuring mid-sized manufacturing companies. Their portfolio included dozens of businesses across the Midwest and Mountain West, companies that they'd purchased, optimized, and either expanded or sold at substantial profits. Victoria Chen was one of their senior partners with an MBA from Wharton and 15 years of experience in industrial acquisitions. Her biography mentioned expertise in identifying undervalued manufacturing businesses and implementing operational improvements that increased their market value. The pieces started falling into place. Meridian Capital Management was the investment firm that had provided the high-interest loan to Thompson Industries. Rachel hadn't just borrowed money from them, she'd entered into a relationship with people who specialized in taking over struggling manufacturing companies. I spent the weekend researching Meridian's acquisition patterns and business model. What I discovered was both brilliant and terrifying. They typically identified family-owned manufacturing businesses that were facing financial pressure or leadership transitions. They would offer emergency financing with terms that seemed reasonable on the surface, but included provisions that gave them significant control if the borrower encountered difficulties. Once they had a financial foothold in the company, they would wait for operational problems to develop. Sometimes these problems occurred naturally due to market conditions or management mistakes. Sometimes they were encouraged through strategic advice that seemed helpful but actually created vulnerabilities. When the company inevitably struggled to meet its loan obligations, Meridian would step in as a white knight, offering to purchase the business and protect the jobs and relationships that the current owners were unable to maintain. The original owners would receive enough money to pay off their debts and walk away with something, but Meridian would acquire a profitable manufacturing business at a fraction of its actual value. Rachel hadn't just borrowed money to solve Thompson Industries' cash flow problems. She'd invited wolves into the chicken coop, and they were now patiently waiting for her incompetence to create the opportunity they needed to take over the company. Wednesday's lunch with Victoria Chen confirmed my suspicions and revealed something even more interesting. Victoria was a woman in her early 40s, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested both success and serious business intent. She had the kind of confident bearing that came from years of negotiating complex deals and managing substantial sums of other people's money. "Thank you for meeting with me, Alex. I know this must seem unusual, reaching out to you so soon after your departure from Thompson Industries. I have to admit, I'm curious about what Meridian Capital wants with a recently unemployed operations manager." Victoria smiled, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision. "You're hardly unemployed by choice, and you're certainly not just an operations manager. Our research suggests that you were essentially running Thompson Industries while your father focused on other priorities, and your sister learned the business." The fact that she'd done research on me was both flattering and slightly unnerving. Investment firms like Meridian didn't waste time investigating people unless they saw potential value in the relationship. "What kind of research?" "The kind that tells us you were responsible for negotiating most of the major supplier contracts over the past 5 years, that you developed the quality control systems that reduced defects by 30%, that you managed the production scheduling that allowed the company to consistently meet delivery commitments even during peak demand periods." Victoria paused to take a sip of wine, letting the implications of her knowledge sink in. "More importantly, our research tells us that you understood Thompson Industries' business better than anyone else in the company, including the person who just fired you. And what does Meridian Capital plan to do with that information? That depends on what you want to do with it." Victoria set down her wine glass and leaned forward slightly, the gesture of someone who was about to make a serious proposition. "Alex, we both know that Thompson Industries is headed for serious problems under Rachel's management. The operational changes she's implementing, the consultant-driven restructuring, the elimination of experienced personnel, it's a textbook example of how to destroy a profitable manufacturing business. That's not exactly a secret. Anyone with industry experience can see what's happening. True, but not everyone is in a position to do anything about it. You are. Victoria reached into her briefcase and pulled out a leather portfolio, setting it on the table between us. We're prepared to offer you a partnership opportunity that would allow you to acquire Thompson Industries when Rachel's management inevitably creates the financial crisis that makes a sale necessary. I stared at the portfolio, trying to process what she was suggesting. You want me to help you take over my family's company? We want to help you save your family's company from your sister's incompetence. There's a difference. Victoria opened the portfolio, revealing documents that appeared to be financial projections and acquisition scenarios. Based on our analysis, Thompson Industries will likely default on its loan obligations within 6 to 8 months. When that happens, we'll have the legal right to call the loan and force a sale of the company's assets. We could simply acquire those assets ourselves, but we'd prefer to work with someone who understands the business and can preserve the relationships and operational knowledge that make it valuable. What exactly are you proposing? A partnership. You would put together an acquisition team, with our financial backing, to purchase Thompson Industries when it becomes available. You would run the company as CEO, implementing the kind of management practices you know work, while we provide the capital and strategic support needed to restore its profitability. Victoria flipped through several pages of financial projections, pointing out key numbers and assumptions. Based on Thompson Industries' historical performance under competent management, we project that the company could be worth $15 to $20 million within 3 years of proper restructuring. Your share of that value would be substantial. The numbers were impressive, but the ethical implications were staggering. Victoria was essentially asking me to profit from Rachel's failure, to position myself to benefit when her mistakes destroyed everything Dad had built. What makes you think Rachel's management will actually fail? Because we've seen this pattern dozens of times. Well-meaning business school graduates who think they can optimize successful companies by applying theoretical models without understanding the practical realities of the industry they're working in. Victoria closed the portfolio and leaned back in her chair. Your sister is implementing changes that will destroy Thompson Industries' competitive advantages while simultaneously increasing its operational costs and financial obligations. She's doing this because consultants have convinced her that efficiency optimization and cost reduction are more important than customer relationships and employee expertise. And you're willing to bet millions of dollars that she'll fail. We already have bet millions of dollars that she'll fail. The loan we provided to Thompson Industries was structured specifically to create the opportunity we're discussing today. The admission was breathtaking in its cynicism. Meridian hadn't just provided emergency financing to help Thompson Industries through a difficult period, they'd provided predatory lending designed to create the conditions for a profitable acquisition. Victoria, what you're describing sounds like a deliberate plan to destroy a family business. What I'm describing is a plan to save a family business from destruction by incompetent management. Your sister is going to ruin Thompson Industries whether we're involved or not. The question is whether you want to be in a position to rebuild it when she does. I spent the rest of lunch listening to Victoria explain Meridian's acquisition strategy and the partnership opportunity they were offering. The financial projections were compelling. The business plan was thoroughly researched, and the timeline seemed realistic based on what I knew about Rachel's management approach. But something about the entire proposition felt fundamentally wrong. Victoria was asking me to profit from the destruction of everything Dad had worked to build, to benefit from Rachel's mistakes instead of trying to prevent them. Even if Rachel deserved the consequences of her poor decisions, the employees at Thompson Industries didn't deserve to lose their jobs because of a power struggle between siblings. I need time to think about this, I said finally. Of course, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this have a limited shelf life, and other parties might become interested if the situation develops in ways we haven't anticipated. Victoria left me with the portfolio and her business card, along with the unsettling knowledge that Rachel's borrowing decision had put Thompson Industries in the crosshairs of predators who specialized in acquiring distressed manufacturing businesses. That afternoon, I called Marcus Williams and asked him to meet me at our usual coffee shop. He looked exhausted when he arrived, like someone who'd been working long hours trying to solve impossible problems. "How are things at the office?" I asked. "Worse than I could have imagined. The Wyoming client termination was just the beginning. We've lost 2 more accounts this week because the consultants insisted on renegotiating contracts that were working fine for everyone involved." Marcus ordered a double espresso, which told me everything I needed to know about his stress level. The worst part is watching good people leave because they can't adapt to the constant changes. Jenny Martinez, from customer service, gave her notice yesterday. She's been with us for 12 years, knows every client account inside and out, but she can't handle the new protocols that require her to process everything through automated systems instead of building relationships. What did Rachel say about Jenny leaving? The same thing she says about everyone who quits, that it's an opportunity to bring in fresh talent who can embrace innovation instead of clinging to outdated practices. Marcus shook his head in disgust. "Alex, I've been in manufacturing for 30 years, and I've never seen a company deliberately destroy its own competitive advantages so systematically. It's like watching someone tear down a perfectly good house because they want to optimize the floor plan. How long before the operational problems become obvious to customers? They already are obvious. We've had 3 delivery delays this week alone, all because the new procurement system doesn't account for supplier lead times and relationship factors. Quality issues are starting to show up because the consultants eliminated inspection protocols they considered redundant." Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Alex, I think we're maybe 2 months away from a complete operational breakdown. And when that happens, when we start losing major clients and missing delivery commitments consistently, the financial impact is going to be devastating." 2 months. Victoria Chen had projected 6 to 8 months before Thompson Industries would face a financial crisis serious enough to trigger default on Meridian's loan. But if Marcus was right about the timeline for operational breakdown, the crisis could come much sooner than anyone anticipated. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing Victoria's portfolio and trying to understand the full scope of what Meridian was proposing. The partnership opportunity was structured as a management buyout, with me leading an acquisition team that would purchase Thompson Industries assets when the company became financially distressed. The financial projections showed that Thompson Industries could be acquired for approximately $8 to $10 million under distressed sale conditions, significantly less than its actual operational value. With proper management, the company could be restored to profitability within 18 months and potentially sold or expanded for substantial returns. My role would be to serve as CEO of the acquired company, implementing operational improvements and rebuilding the client relationships that Rachel's management had damaged. Meridian would provide the acquisition financing and strategic support, while I would receive an equity stake that could be worth millions of dollars if the turnaround succeeded. From a purely financial perspective, the opportunity was extraordinary. I would essentially be paid to fix the problems that Rachel had created, to restore Thompson Industries to the kind of successful operation it had been under competent management. The irony was perfect. Rachel's attempt to modernize the company would create the opportunity for me to acquire and rebuild it according to principles she'd rejected. But the ethical dimensions were more complicated. Accepting Victoria's proposal would mean profiting from the destruction of Dad's legacy, benefiting from the job losses and business disruption that Rachel's incompetence would create. Even if I could rebuild the company and restore the jobs, the transition period would cause real hardship for people who'd devoted their careers to Thompson Industries. More troubling was the realization that Meridian had apparently planned this outcome from the beginning.
The high-interest loan Rachel had arranged wasn't just expensive financing, it was a trap designed to give Meridian control over the company when operational problems created financial pressure. Rachel thought she was solving Thompson Industries' cash flow problems by borrowing from sophisticated investors. In reality, she was handing control of the company to people who specialized in acquiring manufacturing businesses from naive owners who didn't understand the terms they were agreeing to. I spent the weekend researching other companies that had been acquired by Meridian Capital Management. The pattern was consistent: family-owned manufacturing businesses that had borrowed money during difficult periods, then found themselves unable to meet loan obligations when operational changes disrupted their customer relationships and financial stability. In every case, Meridian had acquired the companies at substantial discounts to their actual value, then implemented management changes that restored profitability. Some of the businesses had been sold to larger competitors for significant profits, while others had been expanded and continued to operate under Meridian's ownership. The employees of these companies had experienced mixed outcomes. Some had benefited from Meridian's operational improvements and investment in new equipment and systems. Others had lost their jobs during the restructuring process, particularly those in management positions, who were replaced with Meridian's preferred leadership teams. What was clear from the research was that Meridian was very good at what they did. They understood manufacturing businesses, they knew how to identify operational inefficiencies, and they had the financial resources to implement improvements that family-owned companies often couldn't afford. Their acquisition strategy might be ruthless, but their management approach was generally competent. The question I faced was whether I wanted to be part of that strategy or find some other way to address the crisis that Rachel was creating at Thompson Industries. Monday morning brought news that confirmed my worst fears about the timeline for Thompson Industries' collapse. Marcus called to tell me that our second largest client, a construction equipment manufacturer in Colorado Springs, had given notice that they would not be renewing their annual contract when it expired in 60 days. They cited concerns about quality consistency and delivery reliability. Marcus said, "Issues that have developed since we started using the new procurement and production systems the consultants recommended." What's the revenue impact? About 15% of our annual business. Combined with the Wyoming client and the two smaller accounts we lost last week, we're looking at losing almost 40% of our revenue base within the next 3 months. 40%. Even a well-managed company would struggle to survive that kind of client loss, but Thompson Industries was now being run by people who didn't understand the business well enough to implement effective damage control measures. Marcus, what's Rachel's reaction to all this? She's convinced that losing these clients is actually a good thing, because it will force us to diversify our customer base and reduce our dependence on legacy relationships. The consultants are telling her that client turnover is a normal part of business transformation, and that we'll attract better customers once we've fully implemented their optimization strategies. The disconnect between Rachel's perception and operational reality was becoming so extreme that it bordered on delusional. She was interpreting the destruction of Thompson Industries' customer base as evidence that her transformation strategy was working, when in fact it was proof that her approach was fundamentally flawed. How long before the financial impact becomes undeniable? Based on our current cash flow projections, we'll start having trouble meeting payroll and supplier payments within 60 to 90 days if the client losses continue at this rate. 60 to 90 days. Marcus's projection aligned almost perfectly with Victoria Chen's timeline for Thompson Industries reaching financial crisis. The only difference was that Marcus was looking at the situation from an operational perspective, while Victoria was viewing it as an investment opportunity. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of calling Victoria Chen to discuss Meridian's partnership proposal, I called my father's home phone number, something I hadn't done since the day Rachel was appointed CEO. Dad answered on the third ring, his voice tired but familiar. "Alex? I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Hi, Dad. I was wondering if you might have time for dinner sometime this week. There are some things I think we need to talk about. There was a long pause before he answered. I'd like that. How about tomorrow night? Your mother's visiting her sister in Phoenix, so it would just be the two of us. We agreed to meet at a steakhouse in Cherry Hills Village, not far from the family home where I'd grown up. It would be the first time we'd spoken privately since Rachel's appointment as CEO, and I had no idea how he would react to what I was planning to tell him. But I knew that whatever happened next, Dad deserved to understand the true scope of what Rachel had put in motion and what it meant for everything he'd worked to build over nearly 4 decades. The conversation we were about to have would determine whether Thompson Industries could be saved from the predators who were circling it, or whether Rachel's mistakes would cost our family everything they'd ever worked to achieve. The ultimate reversal. Dad looked older than I remembered as he sat across from me at the steakhouse, his weathered hands wrapped around a glass of bourbon that he barely touched. The past few months had taken a visible toll on him, carving deeper lines around his eyes and adding gray to what had once been thick brown hair. He'd built Thompson Industries from nothing, and watching it crumble under Rachel's management was clearly destroying him. I know why you wanted to have dinner, he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. You want to know why I gave the company to Rachel instead of you. I cut into my steak, choosing my words carefully. Actually, I want to know if you understand what Rachel has done since you made that decision. Dad finally looked up, and I could see the exhaustion in his expression. She's modernizing the business, bringing in fresh perspectives, implementing new systems. It's not easy, but change never is. Dad, she's borrowed $8 million from a predatory lending firm at interest rates that are twice what we could have gotten from our regular bank. She's fired experienced employees and replaced them with consultants who don't understand our industry. She's lost almost 40% of our client base in less than 2 months. The color drained from Dad's face. 40%? That can't be right. I pulled out my phone and showed him the documentation I'd compiled based on Marcus's reports. Client termination letters, revenue projections, cash flow analyses that painted a picture of a company in free fall. The Wyoming account, the Colorado Springs contract, Morrison Manufacturing, Peterson Construction Supply. All gone because Rachel's consultants insisted on renegotiating relationships that had been profitable for years. Dad studied the documents, his hands trembling slightly as he turned the pages. She told me these were strategic adjustments to improve our profit margins. Dad, these weren't adjustments, they were disasters, and the worst part is, the company that loaned us the money specializes in acquiring manufacturing businesses from owners who can't meet their loan obligations. I explained Meridian Capital Management's business model, their track record of predatory lending, and Victoria Chen's partnership proposal. Dad listened in silence, his bourbon growing warm as the full scope of Rachel's mistakes became clear. You're telling me that my daughter has handed our company over to corporate raiders? I'm telling you that Rachel made decisions without understanding their consequences, and now Thompson Industries is in serious danger of being acquired by people who don't care about preserving what you've built. Dad set down the documents and rubbed his temples. How did I get this so wrong? I thought she had the education, the modern business training that would take the company to the next level. Education isn't the same thing as experience, Dad. Running a manufacturing business requires understanding relationships, processes, and operational realities that can't be learned from textbooks. And I suppose you think you could have done better. The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. For 15 years, I'd proven my competence through operational results, crisis management, and the trust of employees and clients. But Dad had chosen to give the company to Rachel, and now we were all facing the consequences of that decision. I think I understood the business better than someone who's been here for 18 months and thinks consultants can replace decades of operational knowledge. Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring into his bourbon like it might contain answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Alex, if what you're telling me is true, if the company is really in as much trouble as these documents suggest, what can we do about it? This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the conversation that could determine the future of Thompson Industries and everyone who depended on it for their livelihood. There might be a way to save the company, but it would require Rachel to admit that her approach isn't working and accept help from someone she just fired. What kind of help? I explained the operational changes that would be necessary to restore client relationships, rebuild staff morale, and stabilize the company's financial situation. It would mean reversing most of Rachel's consultant driven initiatives, rehiring experienced employees who'd quit in frustration, and implementing damage control measures that could prevent further client losses. The question is whether Rachel would be willing to swallow her pride and let me come back to fix the problems she's created. Dad finished his bourbon in one gulp, a gesture I'd never seen him make before. What if she refuses? Then Thompson Industries will probably be acquired by Meridian Capital within 6 months, and everything you've built over the past 40 years will belong to strangers who see it as nothing more than an investment opportunity. The drive home from dinner gave me time to think about the conversation and what it meant for the choices I faced. Dad had been genuinely shocked to learn about the extent of Thompson Industries' problems, which suggested that Rachel had been hiding the severity of the situation from him. Either she didn't understand how serious things were, or she was deliberately keeping him in the dark to avoid having to admit her mistakes. The next morning brought a call from Diana Park that confirmed the company's deteriorating situation. She sounded more stressed than I'd ever heard her, like someone who was watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. "Alex, I need to tell you something, but you can't let anyone know we talked." "What's happening?" Rachel called an emergency meeting yesterday with all the department heads. She announced that we're implementing immediate cost reduction measures to improve our financial performance. 20% staff reduction, elimination of overtime pay, cuts to the health insurance contribution, suspension of the retirement matching program. The measures Diana described were exactly the kind of panic responses that companies implemented when they were facing serious cash flow problems. Rachel was trying to reduce expenses quickly enough to maintain loan payments, but she was doing it in ways that would further damage employee morale and operational capability. What was the reaction from the department heads? 3 more resignations within 24 hours. People who've been with the company for over a decade are walking away rather than trying to manage their departments with skeleton crews and no financial support. Diana paused, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. "Alex, I don't think we have much time left. The way things are going, we'll be looking at total organizational collapse within weeks, not months. Have you talked to Rachel about your concerns?" I tried. She said the cost reductions were temporary measures that would position us for sustainable growth once the business transformation was complete. She actually seemed excited about the opportunity to rebuild the workforce with people who shared her vision. Rachel's ability to interpret catastrophic failure as an opportunity for improvement was becoming almost pathological. She was presiding over the destruction of everything that had made Thompson Industries successful, and she was convinced that this destruction was actually evidence of progress. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Marcus Williams. He sounded different, more determined than desperate, like someone who had finally made a difficult decision. "Alex, I'm calling to let you know that I'm submitting my resignation today. I can't continue to be part of what's happening to this company." "Marcus, you've been there for 15 years. Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure. I've watched Rachel destroy everything your father built, and I can't pretend to support her decisions anymore. The consulting fees alone are costing more than my entire department's annual budget, and we're getting advice from people who've never operated a manufacturing business in their lives." Marcus paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a determination I'd never heard before. "But I'm not just calling to say goodbye, I'm calling to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "I'm starting my own consulting firm, focused on helping manufacturing businesses implement operational improvements without destroying their competitive advantages. I want you to be my
partner. The proposal caught me completely off guard. Marcus was offering me an opportunity to build something new, to work with manufacturing companies that needed the kind of practical expertise that Rachel's consultants lacked. Marcus, that's a generous offer, but I'm not sure I'm ready to start over in a completely different business. Think about it, Alex. We both understand manufacturing operations better than most of the consultants who are charging companies like Thompson Industries millions of dollars for advice that doesn't work. We could build a practice around preserving operational knowledge instead of destroying it. The idea was intriguing, but it would mean abandoning any possibility of saving Thompson Industries and watching from the sidelines while Rachel completed the destruction of Dad's legacy. Can I have some time to think about it? Of course. But don't wait too long. I'm getting calls from other companies that are dealing with similar problems, and the demand for competent operational consulting is only going to increase as more businesses discover that theoretical optimization doesn't work in the real world. After Marcus hung up, I sat in my apartment trying to process the choices I was facing. Victoria Chen was offering me the opportunity to acquire Thompson Industries after Rachel's mismanagement forced it into bankruptcy. Marcus was offering me the chance to build a new business helping other companies avoid the mistakes Rachel was making. Dad was hoping I could somehow save the family business from the consequences of decisions he'd supported. Each option had compelling advantages and significant drawbacks. Partnering with Meridian would give me the resources to rebuild Thompson Industries, but it would mean profiting from the destruction of everything Dad had worked to create. Starting a consulting firm with Marcus would allow me to help other businesses, but it would mean abandoning the employees and clients who were depending on Thompson Industries for their livelihoods. Trying to save Thompson Industries directly would be the most challenging option, requiring Rachel to admit her mistakes and accept help from someone she'd fired. But it was also the only option that offered the possibility of preserving Dad's legacy and protecting the people who'd devoted their careers to the company. Thursday morning brought the news that made my decision inevitable. Diana Park called to tell me that Thompson Industries had received default notices from 3 major suppliers, all demanding immediate payment for overdue invoices that the company's cash flow problems had prevented from being paid on time. Rachel's trying to negotiate payment extensions, but the suppliers are refusing. They're saying that our payment patterns have become too unreliable, and they need cash on delivery for any future orders. Cash on delivery terms would make it almost impossible for Thompson Industries to maintain adequate inventory levels, which would create production delays that would drive away even more clients. Diana, how long before the company runs out of cash entirely? Based on our current burn rate and the acceleration of payment demands, maybe 3 weeks, 4 at the outside. 3 weeks. The timeline for Thompson Industries' collapse had accelerated beyond even the most pessimistic projections. Rachel's cost reduction measures weren't solving the underlying problems, they were creating new crises that compounded the existing financial pressure. That afternoon, I called Dad and asked him to meet me at the Thompson Industries office that evening after regular business hours. If we were going to attempt an intervention, it needed to happen immediately, before the company's situation became completely hopeless. Dad met me in the lobby at 7 p.m., looking like he'd aged another 5 years since our dinner conversation. The building felt different after hours, quieter and somehow smaller, like the energy and purpose that had once filled it were gradually draining away. We took the elevator to the executive floor, where Rachel's office was still lit despite the late hour. She was at her desk, surrounded by stacks of financial reports, and talking animatedly on the phone with someone who was presumably helping her manage the latest crisis. When she saw us through her office window, her expression shifted from concentration to annoyance, to something that might have been fear. She ended her phone call abruptly and came to the door, looking back and forth between Dad and me with the weariness of someone who suspected they were about to be ambushed. "Dad, Alex, what are you doing here? We need to talk," Dad said simply, "all of us, together about what's happening to this company." Rachel's jaw tightened. "If this is about the cost reduction measures, I can explain the strategic reasoning behind those decisions." "Rachel, sit down," Dad said, and there was something in his tone that I hadn't heard since we were children, an authority that brooked no argument. She sat behind her desk, trying to maintain the appearance of executive control, but her hands were shaking slightly as she arranged papers that didn't need arranging. Dad pulled out copies of the documents I'd shown him at dinner, spreading them across Rachel's desk like evidence at a trial. Explain to me how losing 40% of our client base in 2 months represents strategic progress. Rachel's eyes darted across the documents, and I could see her mind racing to construct explanations that would make the numbers less damning than they appeared. These client losses were anticipated outcomes of our operational optimization process. We made strategic decisions to prioritize relationships with customers who could appreciate modern service delivery models over legacy clients who were resistant to innovation. The corporate buzzword salad was even more pathetic than usual, given that we were looking at documentation of Thompson Industries' impending collapse. Rachel, I said quietly, those legacy clients represented $15 million in annual revenue. The modern service delivery models you're prioritizing have generated exactly $0 in replacement business. Her face flushed red. You don't understand the transformation process we're implementing. Short-term disruptions are normal when companies are upgrading their operational frameworks. Short-term disruptions. Dad's voice was rising. Rachel, we have 3 weeks of cash left. 3 weeks. This isn't a transformation, it's a liquidation. For the first time since becoming CEO, Rachel looked genuinely shaken. The financial reality that she'd been ignoring or explaining away was finally being presented in terms that couldn't be dismissed with consultant jargon. The cash flow situation is temporary, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. We're implementing cost reduction measures that will stabilize our financial position while we complete the operational restructuring. Rachel, the cost reduction measures are driving away the remaining experienced employees. You're trying to solve a revenue problem by eliminating the people who generate revenue. Dad leaned forward, and for the first time in months, he looked like the executive who had built Thompson Industries into a successful business. Rachel, I made a mistake. I gave you control of this company because I thought your business school education would bring fresh perspectives to our operations. But education without experience is dangerous, and you've proven that theoretical knowledge can't replace practical understanding. Rachel's composure finally cracked. So you're taking the company away from me, just like that? I'm trying to save the company from bankruptcy. And right now, that means bringing in someone who understands how to fix the problems you've created. Dad turned to me, his expression mixing hope with desperation. Alex, I know I made mistakes in how I handled your termination, but Thompson Industries needs someone who understands the business, who can rebuild the relationships and operational systems that made us successful. Will you come back? The moment I'd been anticipating for weeks had finally arrived. Dad was offering me the opportunity to save Thompson Industries, to return as the operational leader who could reverse Rachel's disastrous decisions and restore the company to profitability. But I could see in Rachel's face that this wasn't going to be a simple transition. She'd spent months convincing herself that her approach was correct, that any problems were temporary setbacks rather than fundamental failures. She wasn't going to accept being replaced gracefully. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Rachel remains as CEO, but you return as Chief Operating Officer with complete authority over daily operations, client relationships, supplier management, and personnel decisions. Essentially, you run the company while Rachel focuses on strategic planning and external relationships. It was a face-saving compromise that would give me the operational control needed to implement damage control measures while allowing Rachel to maintain the title and public position she'd fought so hard to achieve. And the consultants, gone. All consulting contracts terminated immediately. Rachel finally exploded. This is insane. You're going to destroy everything we've accomplished, everything we've invested in transforming this company into a modern business. Rachel, what you've accomplished is bringing this company to the brink of bankruptcy. What you've invested in is advice from people who don't understand manufacturing businesses. Dad's voice was firm but not unkind.
You can keep learning the business, but you're going to learn it from someone who actually knows how to run it successfully. The offer was everything I'd hoped for, the opportunity to save Thompson Industries and restore it to the kind of operation that could support 200 families and serve clients effectively. But I could see that Rachel wasn't going to accept this arrangement willingly, and working with a resentful CEO, who undermined every operational decision, would be almost as difficult as letting the company collapse entirely. I need one additional condition, I said. Dad raised an eyebrow. What's that? Rachel signs a formal agreement acknowledging that all operational decisions are mine to make, and that any interference with those decisions will result in her immediate termination as CEO. Rachel's face turned white. You're trying to force me out entirely. I'm trying to make sure that when I reverse your mistakes and rebuild the relationships you've destroyed, you don't sabotage that work, because your ego can't handle being wrong. The silence in the room was deafening. Rachel stared at the documents on her desk, probably calculating whether accepting this arrangement was better than watching Thompson Industries collapse under her leadership. Dad waited patiently, understanding that the decision ultimately had to be hers. Finally, Rachel looked up with tears in her eyes. Fine, but I want it on record that I believe this is a mistake, that we're abandoning innovative practices in favor of outdated approaches that will limit our long-term growth potential. Noted, Dad said. Alex, when can you start? Monday morning, but I'm going to need some immediate authority to begin damage control measures. Over the next hour, we worked out the details of my return to Thompson Industries. Rachel would remain as CEO, but with severely limited authority over operational matters. I would have complete control over hiring, firing, supplier relationships, client management, and production processes. The consulting contracts would be terminated immediately, saving over $50,000 per month in fees. Most importantly, I would have the authority to rehire experienced employees who had quit during Rachel's restructuring, starting with Marcus Williams and Jenny Martinez. Rebuilding the operational team would be crucial for restoring client confidence and production capability. As we prepared to leave the office, Rachel made one final attempt to maintain some control over the situation. I want regular reports on all operational changes, and I reserve the right to review any decisions that might affect our strategic direction. Rachel, you'll get weekly summaries of operational activities, but operational decisions are not subject to your review or approval. That's the arrangement you just agreed to. She nodded reluctantly, but I could see in her expression that she was already planning ways to reassert her authority once the immediate crisis had passed. The next morning, I called Victoria Chen to inform her that I wouldn't be accepting Meridian's partnership proposal. I'm disappointed but not surprised, she said. Family loyalty is admirable, even when it's not financially rational. What happens to Thompson Industries' loan now? Nothing changes. The loan terms remain in effect, and Meridian retains all the rights and provisions we negotiated with your sister. If you succeed in turning the company around, you'll meet your payment obligations and everyone benefits. If you fail, we'll exercise our rights to recover our investment. Victoria paused, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Alex, you should understand that we're not hoping for your failure. A successful turnaround would actually be more profitable for us than an acquisition, but we're prepared for either outcome. After hanging up with Victoria, I called Marcus Williams to offer him his old job back, along with a promotion to Senior Vice President of Operations and a 20% salary increase. Are you serious? He asked. Rachel's actually going to let you undo everything she's done. Rachel doesn't have a choice. The company is 3 weeks away from bankruptcy, and Dad finally understands that business school theories can't replace operational experience. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Alex, what about my consulting firm idea? I've already had conversations with potential clients. Keep pursuing it. If Thompson Industries survives, you'll have the operational expertise to build a consulting practice that actually helps manufacturing companies instead of destroying them. If we don't survive, you'll need the backup plan. Over the weekend, I prepared for what would be the most challenging professional situation of my career. I had 3 weeks to stabilize Thompson Industries' cash flow, restore client relationships that had been damaged by months of mismanagement, rebuild a workforce that had been decimated by cost reduction measures, and implement operational systems that could support sustainable profitability. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rachel had fired me for being a worthless burden who couldn't adapt to modern business practices. Now she was depending on me to save her from the consequences of those same modern business practices. Monday morning, I walked into Thompson Industries as Chief Operating Officer, with complete authority to reverse the decisions that had brought the company to the brink of collapse. Rachel was waiting in the lobby, presumably to make sure that everyone understood she was still the CEO, despite my expanded role. "Good morning, Alex. I trust you're ready to begin implementing your operational changes." "Good morning, Rachel. I'm ready to begin saving the company you nearly destroyed." The first item on my agenda was a meeting with the remaining department heads to assess the current situation and begin planning damage control measures. The second item was calling our most important clients to personally apologize for the service disruptions and assure them that Thompson Industries was returning to the operational standards they'd come to expect. The third item was terminating all consulting contracts and escorting Rachel's advisors out of the building, along with their optimization strategies and efficiency metrics that had optimized Thompson Industries right into near bankruptcy. By the end of the first week, I'd rehired 6 experienced employees, renegotiated payment terms with 3 major suppliers, and convinced 2 former clients to give us another chance, based on my personal guarantee that service quality would return to previous standards. By the end of the first month, Thompson Industries was cash flow positive again, production schedules were being met consistently, and employee morale had improved dramatically. Rachel attended our weekly operational meetings and provided input when asked, but she was no longer in a position to override decisions made by people who actually understood the business. The transformation was remarkable, but it wasn't without cost. We'd lost almost a year of growth opportunities, several valuable employees had moved on to other companies, and some client relationships would take months or years to fully restore. Most importantly, we were still operating under Meridian's loan terms, which meant that any future financial problems could result in the company being acquired by people who saw it as an investment rather than a legacy. But Thompson Industries survived Rachel's attempt to modernize it, and the employees who depended on the company for their livelihoods kept their jobs. Dad's legacy was preserved, even if it would never be quite the same as it had been before Rachel's disastrous tenure as CEO. 6 months later, Rachel submitted her resignation as CEO, citing a desire to pursue other opportunities in management consulting. She'd apparently learned enough about operational destruction to market herself as an expert in business transformation, though I suspected her future clients might want to examine her track record more carefully than Thompson Industries had. Dad asked me to take over as CEO, a position I accepted with the understanding that the company would focus on sustainable growth rather than disruptive innovation. We paid off Meridian's loan ahead of schedule, eliminating the threat of acquisition and giving us complete control over our future direction. Thompson Industries never became the modern optimized business that Rachel had envisioned. Instead, it remained a practical, relationship-based manufacturing company that served its clients effectively and provided good jobs for its employees. Sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones, and sometimes experience matters more than education. Rachel eventually started her own consulting firm, specializing in helping family businesses implement strategic transformations. I heard through industry contacts that her first major client went bankrupt within 8 months of implementing her recommendations. Some lessons apparently are harder to learn than others. As for me, I rebuilt Thompson Industries into the kind of company Dad had originally envisioned, one that balanced profitability with responsibility, innovation with stability, growth with sustainability. It wasn't the dramatic success story that business schools celebrate, but it was the kind of quiet achievement that supports families and communities for generations. And every time I walked through the production floor or reviewed our financial reports, I was reminded that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, but simply proving them wrong. 2 years after Rachel's resignation as CEO, I was sitting in my office reviewing the quarterly financial reports when Diana Park knocked on my door with a familiar manila folder in her hands, but this time, her expression was one of satisfaction rather than worry. "The Q3 numbers are in," she said, setting the folder on my desk with a smile that I hadn't seen from her in years. "I think you're going to like what you see." I opened the folder and scanned the financial summary. Revenue was up 18% compared to the same quarter 2 years ago, before Rachel's disastrous restructuring attempt. More importantly, our profit margins had improved by 12%, driven by the operational efficiencies that came from actually understanding our business rather than trying to optimize it according to theoretical models. "These are the best numbers we've posted since 2019, I said, looking up at Diana. "How are the employee satisfaction surveys looking?" "Even better than the financials. 92% satisfaction rate, up from 38% during the consultant period. Turnover is down to less than 5% annually, and we have a waiting list of qualified candidates who want to work here." The transformation had been even more successful than I'd hoped. By focusing on sustainable practices rather than disruptive innovation, we'd built Thompson Industries into exactly the kind of company that attracted both talented employees and loyal customers. It wasn't the flashiest business model, but it was effective and profitable. "Any word from our friends at Meridian Capital?" I asked. Diana's smile widened. "Actually, yes. Victoria Chen called yesterday to congratulate us on paying off the loan 6 months early. She said it was one of the most successful turnarounds they'd ever witnessed, and she was impressed that we'd managed to preserve the company culture while still achieving significant growth. Paying off Meridian's predatory loan had been one of my highest priorities, not just for financial reasons, but for the psychological satisfaction of proving that Thompson Industries could succeed without external intervention. Victoria Chen had bet that Rachel's incompetence would create an acquisition opportunity, and instead she'd watched us turn the company into a more valuable business than it had ever been. "There's one more thing," Diana said, pulling a second folder from under her arm. "We received a job application that I thought you might want to see personally." I opened the folder and immediately recognized the resume at the top. Rachel Thompson, applying for a position as Director of Strategic Planning at Thompson Industries. The irony was so perfect that I had to read it twice to make sure I wasn't imagining things. According to her resume, Rachel had spent the past 2 years building a consulting practice focused on operational transformation and strategic restructuring. Her client list included several manufacturing companies, though I noticed that none of the engagements had lasted more than 6 months. "She's applying to work for the company she used to run?" I asked. Apparently her consulting firm hasn't been as successful as she hoped. According to her cover letter, she's learned valuable lessons about the importance of preserving operational knowledge during transformation processes, and she believes her experience would be valuable for our continued growth. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the magnitude of what Rachel was proposing. After nearly destroying Thompson Industries with her misguided modernization efforts, she wanted to return as an employee, working for the brother she'd fired, and under the operational framework she'd tried to eliminate. "What do you think we should do?" Diana asked. The question required more consideration than I would have expected. On one hand, Rachel had demonstrated catastrophically poor judgment during her tenure as CEO, and there was no guarantee that she'd learned from her mistakes. On the other hand, she was family, and Dad had always believed in giving people second chances when they showed genuine remorse and willingness to learn. "Schedule an interview," I said finally. "I want to hear what she has to say about her experience over the past 2 years." The interview was scheduled for the following Friday, in the same conference room where Rachel had announced my termination 2.5 years earlier. I arrived early and arranged the seating so that she would be sitting in the chair where I had received the news that my 15 years of dedication meant nothing to the new leadership. Rachel arrived precisely on time, dressed in a conservative business suit that was a far cry from the power outfits she'd worn as CEO. She looked tired, like someone who had spent months trying to convince skeptical clients that her theories would work despite evidence to the contrary. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "I know this situation is unusual, to say the least. Unusual is one word for it. Tell me about your consulting practice." Rachel's expression tightened slightly. "It's been a learning experience. I've worked with several manufacturing companies over the past 2 years, helping them implement strategic improvements and operational optimizations. And how have those implementations gone?" She was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with how much honesty the situation required. "Mixed results. Some of the theoretical approaches that seemed promising in business school don't always translate effectively to real-world manufacturing environments." It was the closest thing to an admission of failure I'd ever heard from Rachel, though she was still framing her mistakes in terms of theoretical versus practical applications, rather than acknowledging that her approach had been fundamentally flawed. "Rachel, let me be direct. Your tenure as CEO of Thompson Industries was a disaster. You nearly bankrupted the company, destroyed client relationships that had taken decades to build, and drove away experienced employees who were crucial to our operational success. Why should I trust you with any level of responsibility here?" Rachel's composure finally cracked, and for the first time since she'd returned, I saw genuine emotion rather than practiced professionalism. "Because I was wrong," she said quietly. "Not just wrong about specific decisions, but wrong about the entire approach. I thought that business education and consultant expertise could replace operational experience, and I nearly destroyed everything Dad built because of that arrogance." She leaned forward, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. "Alex, I spent 2 years trying to prove that my methods could work with other companies, and I failed every time. Every single client engagement ended with the same result: short-term improvements, followed by operational problems that were worse than the original issues I was supposed to solve." So what changed? I finally understood that there's a difference between theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom. MBA programs teach you how businesses should work according to academic models, but they don't teach you how businesses actually work in the real world, with real relationships and real operational constraints. Rachel pulled out a folder and set it on the table between us. "This is documentation from my consulting engagements over the past 2 years. Every failure, every mistake, every client relationship that ended badly because I applied textbook solutions to complex practical problems. I'm not sharing this to impress you with my experience. I'm sharing it to prove that I finally understand why my approach to Thompson Industries was so destructive." I opened the folder and scanned through reports that painted a consistent picture of consulting projects that had started with optimistic projections and ended with operational disasters, client testimonials that began positively and deteriorated as Rachel's recommendations created problems that her theoretical framework couldn't solve. "Why do you want to work here, instead of continuing with consulting?" "Because I want to learn how to actually run a manufacturing business, instead of just theorizing about optimization strategies, and because this is the only place where I can learn from someone who's proven that operational excellence comes from understanding relationships, processes, and people rather than just analyzing spreadsheets." The admission was so complete and unexpected that it took me several moments to formulate a response. Rachel wasn't just acknowledging that her CEO tenure had been unsuccessful, she was admitting that her entire approach to business had been misguided, and she was
asking me to teach her the practical skills she'd dismissed as outdated. "Rachel, even if I believed that you'd learned from your mistakes, how do I know you wouldn't revert to your old patterns once you were back in a position of authority? Because I'm not asking for a position of authority. I'm asking for an entry-level role where I can learn operational processes from people who actually understand them." No strategic planning, no transformation initiatives, no consultant-driven changes, just practical experience doing the work that makes manufacturing businesses successful. I studied her face, looking for signs of the arrogance and overconfidence that had characterized her previous approach to business leadership. What I saw instead was humility, exhaustion, and what appeared to be genuine remorse for the damage she'd caused. What specifically do you want to learn? Everything I should have learned before I became CEO. How to build and maintain client relationships, how to manage supplier partnerships, how to develop employee trust and loyalty, how to identify and solve operational problems before they become crises. Rachel paused, then continued with more emotion than I'd heard from her in years. Alex, I know I don't deserve a second chance, and I know you'd be completely justified in rejecting this application. But I also know that Thompson Industries succeeded because it was built on the principle of developing people and giving them opportunities to contribute their best work. I'm asking you to extend that principle to someone who made terrible mistakes but is finally ready to learn from them. The appeal was both professionally reasonable and personally compelling. Thompson Industries had always been committed to employee development and second chances for people who showed genuine commitment to improvement. More importantly, Rachel was family, and despite everything that had happened, she was Dad's daughter and my sister. If I were to consider this, what role do you think would be appropriate? Assistant Operations Coordinator. Something where I can work directly with production scheduling, supplier coordination, and customer service under close supervision from experienced managers. I want to understand how things actually work before I ever have opinions about how they should be changed. The role she described was essentially an entry-level position that would typically be filled by someone with a college degree but no practical experience. For someone with Rachel's educational credentials and business background, it would represent a significant step down from any position she'd held over the past 5 years. The salary for that position is $42,000 annually, with standard benefits and a probationary period that would require satisfactory performance evaluations for the first 12 months. I understand. I'm not looking for special treatment or accelerated advancement. I just want the opportunity to prove that I can contribute to this company's success instead of undermining it. I spent the weekend thinking about Rachel's application and what it would mean for Thompson Industries to hire someone whose previous tenure had nearly destroyed the company. There were obvious risks involved in giving her another chance, but there were also potential benefits if she had genuinely learned from her mistakes. The employees who remembered Rachel's CEO period would undoubtedly be skeptical of her return, regardless of the role she was seeking. Some might see it as rewarding failure or undermining the meritocratic culture we'd worked to rebuild. Others might appreciate the demonstration that people could learn from mistakes and earn redemption through humility and hard work. More importantly, Rachel's return would be a visible test of Thompson Industries' commitment to employee development and second chances. If we could successfully integrate someone who had failed so spectacularly in the past, it would demonstrate that our culture was genuinely focused on growth and learning rather than just punishing mistakes. Monday morning, I called Rachel to offer her the Assistant Operations Coordinator position with strict conditions attached to the offer. You'll be working directly under Marcus Williams, who will evaluate your performance and provide detailed feedback on your progress. Any attempt to circumvent his authority or implement changes without proper approval will result in immediate termination. I understand. You'll be required to attend weekly training sessions on manufacturing processes, customer relationship management, and operational problem solving. These aren't optional, and your performance in these sessions will be part of your evaluation. Of course, most importantly, you'll be starting at the bottom of the organizational hierarchy, with no special treatment or consideration based on your previous position or family relationship. You'll earn advancement through demonstrated competence and sustained contributions, not through seniority or connections. Rachel was quiet for a moment before responding. Alex, I know this is more generosity than I deserve, and I want you to know that I won't waste this opportunity. I'm ready to work harder and learn more than I've ever done in my professional life. We'll see. Your start date is next Monday. Report to Marcus at 7:30 a.m. for orientation. Rachel's first day back at Thompson Industries was awkward for everyone involved. Employees who remembered her CEO tenure watched with obvious curiosity as she attended orientation sessions and received assignments from managers who had once reported to her. Some seemed skeptical of her motives, while others appeared genuinely interested in whether someone could successfully recover from such a complete professional failure. Marcus Williams handled the situation with characteristic professionalism, treating Rachel exactly as he would any other new employee, while maintaining the authority to evaluate her performance without bias. His weekly reports during Rachel's first month were cautiously optimistic. She's working hard and asking intelligent questions, but she still has a tendency to suggest improvements before she fully understands existing processes, he wrote in his third-week evaluation. However, she accepts feedback well and appears genuinely committed to learning rather than just waiting for an opportunity to implement her own ideas. By the end of her first quarter, Rachel had demonstrated competence in basic operational tasks and was beginning to understand the practical complexities that made manufacturing businesses different from the theoretical models she'd studied in business school. More importantly, she was developing relationships with frontline employees who initially had been skeptical of her presence. The production crew is starting to trust her, Marcus reported. She's spent enough time on the floor to understand their daily challenges, and she's stopped making suggestions that sound good in theory but don't work in practice. 6 months into Rachel's tenure as Assistant Operations Coordinator, Thompson Industries received recognition from the Colorado Manufacturing Association for our improvements in operational efficiency and employee retention. The award ceremony was held at a downtown Denver hotel with representatives from manufacturing companies throughout the region. During the reception, I was approached by Victoria Chen, who had apparently heard about our recent success and wanted to offer her congratulations in person. Alex, I have to admit, when I heard that you'd hired your sister back after everything that happened, I thought you were making an emotional decision that would undermine your operational improvements. And now, Victoria smiled, sipping her wine while observing the industry professionals who were discussing Thompson Industries' turnaround with obvious respect. Now I'm impressed. It takes significant confidence in your management systems to successfully reintegrate someone who had failed so dramatically in a leadership role. The fact that she's apparently thriving in an entry-level position suggests that your approach to employee development is more sophisticated than I initially recognized. People can learn from their mistakes if they're genuinely committed to growth. True, but most people in Rachel's position would be too proud to accept such a dramatic reduction in status. The fact that she was willing to start over at the bottom suggests that she finally understood the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical competence. Victoria paused, then continued with the kind of professional curiosity that had made her successful in the investment business. Have you considered what role she might play in the company's future? Someone who has experienced both catastrophic failure and successful rehabilitation might have valuable insights for other businesses dealing with similar challenges. The question was one I'd been thinking about as Rachel demonstrated sustained competence in her current role. After a year of satisfactory performance, she would be eligible for promotion to roles with greater responsibility, but I hadn't yet determined what kind of career path would be appropriate for someone with her unique combination of education, failure, and hard-won practical experience. That evening, I had dinner with Dad at the same steakhouse where we discussed Thompson Industries' crisis 2 years earlier. He looked healthier and more relaxed than he had in years, like someone who was finally comfortable with the company's direction and leadership. I heard about the Manufacturing Association Award, he said, raising his glass in a toast. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished. We've accomplished. I corrected. This company's success belongs to everyone who contributed to rebuilding it, including Rachel. The question was asked casually, but I could see that Dad was genuinely curious about my assessment of Rachel's progress and future potential. Rachel has worked harder over the past year than she probably did during her entire MBA program. She's learned operational processes, developed relationships with employees and customers, and proven that she can contribute to the company's success when she focuses on practical results rather than theoretical optimization. Do you think she's ready for greater responsibility? I think she's ready for incremental advancement based on demonstrated competence. But I also think she understands now that leadership positions have to be earned through sustained performance rather than granted based on education or family relationships. Dad nodded thoughtfully. What about her long-term role in the company? Do you see her eventually returning to executive leadership? The question required careful consideration. Rachel had proven that she could function effectively in an entry-level operational role, but executive leadership required different skills and carried much greater risks if mistakes were made. Maybe, eventually, if she continues to demonstrate good judgment and practical competence over several years, but any advancement would have to be gradual, with clear performance benchmarks and the understanding that leadership authority has to be earned through operational excellence. That sounds like exactly the right approach. Dad finished his steak and leaned back in his chair, looking satisfied in a way that I hadn't seen since before Rachel's disastrous CEO tenure. Alex, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished with Thompson Industries, but I'm even more proud of how you've handled the situation with Rachel. It would have been understandable if you'd refused to give her a second chance, but your decision to focus on redemption rather than punishment has been good for the company and good for our family. She earned the second chance by acknowledging her mistakes and demonstrating genuine commitment to learning. Still, not everyone would have been generous enough to provide that opportunity. The following Monday, I called Rachel into my office for her annual performance review. She'd been working as assistant operations coordinator for exactly 1 year, and her evaluations had been consistently positive throughout that period. Your performance reviews from Marcus and the other department heads have been excellent, I said, opening her personnel file. You've demonstrated competence in operational processes, developed strong working relationships, and shown genuine commitment to continuous improvement. Rachel smiled, but I could see that she was nervous about what might come next. Based on these evaluations, I'm promoting you to operations coordinator with a salary increase to $55,000 annually and expanded responsibilities for supplier relationship management and production scheduling oversight. Thank you, Alex. I know this opportunity is more than I deserved after everything that happened. Rachel, you've earned this promotion through sustained hard work and demonstrated competence, but I want to be clear about my expectations going forward. I leaned forward, making sure she understood the seriousness of what I was saying. This promotion comes with greater responsibility and more independence in decision-making. But it also comes with the understanding that any return to your previous patterns of overconfidence or consultant-driven solutions will result in immediate demotion or termination. I understand, and Alex, I want you to know that I have no intention of ever returning to those patterns. I've learned that operational excellence comes from understanding practical realities, not from implementing theoretical optimizations. Rachel paused, then continued with an earnestness that reminded me of conversations we'd had as children when she was genuinely trying to understand something important. The past year has taught me more about business than my entire MBA program. Working directly with production processes, supplier relationships, and customer service has shown me how complex manufacturing operations really are, and how much damage can be done by someone who thinks they understand business but doesn't understand the specific industry they're trying to manage.
What's the most important thing you've learned? That relationships matter more than efficiency metrics. A supplier who trusts you will work with you during crisis situations in ways that can't be quantified on a spreadsheet. An employee who feels valued will solve problems proactively instead of just doing the minimum required work. A customer who trusts your service will remain loyal even when competitors offer lower prices. Rachel's answer demonstrated exactly the kind of practical wisdom that her business school education had failed to provide. She'd learned through direct experience what I'd tried to explain to her during her CEO tenure, that successful manufacturing businesses were built on trust, competence, and long-term relationships, rather than short-term optimizations. That understanding will serve you well in your new role. Over the following months, Rachel proved herself capable of handling increased responsibility without reverting to her previous patterns of overreach and theoretical solutions. Her promotion to operations coordinator was followed by consistent performance evaluations that demonstrated both competence and appropriate humility. The transformation was remarkable, but it wasn't without ongoing challenges. Some employees remained skeptical of Rachel's commitment to practical operations rather than disruptive innovation. Others worried that her family relationship might eventually result in unearned advancement beyond her demonstrated capabilities. These concerns were addressed through transparent performance evaluation processes and clear advancement criteria that applied equally to all employees regardless of their background or connections. Rachel's progress was measured against the same standards used for other operations coordinators, and her advancement opportunities were based solely on sustained performance rather than family considerations. 18 months after her return to Thompson Industries, Rachel was promoted to Senior Operations Coordinator with responsibility for managing supplier relationships and production scheduling across all product lines. The promotion came with a salary increase to $68,000 annually and recognition as one of the company's most improved employees. More importantly, Rachel had become a valuable mentor for other employees who were learning operational processes, sharing the practical wisdom she'd gained through her own difficult learning experience. Her willingness to acknowledge past mistakes and focus on continuous improvement had earned her the respect of colleagues who initially had been skeptical of her return. The annual company meeting that year included a presentation on Thompson Industries' growth over the previous 3 years. Revenue had increased by 32%, profit margins had improved by 18%, and employee retention had reached industry-leading levels. Customer satisfaction surveys showed the highest ratings in company history, and our supplier relationships were stronger than they'd ever been. During the question and answer session following my presentation, one of the production supervisors asked about the role that second chances and employee development had played in our success. We've always believed that people can grow and improve when they're given appropriate support and clear expectations, I responded. Sometimes the employees who contribute most to our success are those who've learned from difficult experiences and developed genuine appreciation for operational excellence. After the meeting, Rachel approached me with an expression that mixed gratitude with determination. "Alex, I know I'll never be able to fully make up for the damage I caused during my time as CEO, but I want you to know that everything I've learned since then has been focused on contributing to this company's success rather than advancing my own career. Your contributions over the past 18 months have been substantial, and they've been noticed by everyone who works with you. I have a request, and I want you to consider it carefully before responding." Rachel pulled out a folder and set it on the desk between us. "I've been documenting everything I've learned about operational excellence over the past year and a half, not just the technical processes, but the relationship management and practical problem-solving approaches that make Thompson Industries successful." She opened the folder to reveal a comprehensive manual that covered supplier relationship management, customer service excellence, employee development strategies, and crisis management techniques. I'd like permission to develop this into a training program that we could offer to other manufacturing companies, sharing the practical wisdom that Thompson Industries has developed over 40 years of operation. The proposal was both ambitious and potentially valuable. Thompson Industries had developed operational practices that were demonstrably successful, and there was clearly demand in the market for practical business advice that actually worked in real-world manufacturing environments. This would be different from typical business consulting. How? It would focus on preserving and enhancing existing operational strengths rather than implementing disruptive changes. Instead of telling companies what they should do according to theoretical models, we'd help them understand and optimize what they're already doing successfully. Rachel's approach represented a complete reversal of the consultant-driven methodology that had nearly destroyed Thompson Industries. Instead of imposing external solutions, she was proposing to help companies build on their existing strengths and relationships. Who would be the target market? Family-owned manufacturing businesses that are facing pressure to modernize their operations but want to preserve the relationships and practices that have made them successful. Companies that need operational improvements but don't want to sacrifice their competitive advantages in pursuit of theoretical efficiencies. The target market she described was exactly the kind of business that typically fell victim to destructive consulting engagements like the one Rachel had originally implemented at Thompson Industries. If she could help other companies avoid those mistakes while still achieving genuine improvements, it would be both profitable and socially valuable. I'd want to start small, maybe offering seminars and workshops rather than comprehensive consulting engagements. The goal would be to share practical knowledge and proven methodologies rather than selling transformation packages. Rachel's proposal demonstrated the practical wisdom she'd gained through her difficult learning experience. She understood now that sustainable business improvements came through incremental enhancements rather than dramatic disruptions, and she wanted to share that understanding with other companies that might be facing similar challenges. Put together a detailed business plan and present it to the senior management team next month. If the concept is sound and the implementation approach is practical, Thompson Industries might be interested in supporting this kind of training initiative. The proposal Rachel ultimately presented was both professionally competent and personally meaningful. The training program would position Thompson Industries as a source of practical manufacturing expertise while generating additional revenue through knowledge sharing rather than operational consulting. More importantly, it would allow Rachel to contribute to preventing other companies from making the mistakes that had nearly destroyed her family's business. Instead of profiting from destructive consulting engagements, she would be helping manufacturing businesses preserve and enhance their operational strengths. The senior management team approved Rachel's proposal unanimously, recognizing both its commercial potential and its alignment with Thompson Industries' values of practical excellence and relationship-based business practices. The training program was launched 6 months later with a pilot seminar attended by representatives from 12 Colorado manufacturing companies. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Participants appreciated receiving practical advice from people who had actually implemented successful operational improvements rather than theoretical recommendations from consultants who had never managed manufacturing businesses. 3 years after Rachel's return to Thompson Industries as an entry-level employee, she was promoted to Director of Training and Knowledge Management, with responsibility for both internal employee development and external training programs. Her salary had increased to $85,000 annually, and her contributions to company revenue through training programs had exceeded $200,000 in the previous fiscal year. But the most significant measure of Rachel's transformation wasn't financial or professional. It was the respect she had earned from colleagues who had witnessed her journey from arrogant incompetence to practical wisdom, from destructive leadership to constructive contribution. The annual employee satisfaction survey that year included comments that reflected the impact of Rachel's personal growth on Thompson Industries' culture. Seeing someone learn from their mistakes and earn their way back through hard work has made me more confident that this company really does value personal development over politics. Rachel's willingness to start over at the bottom and prove herself through performance rather than connections shows that advancement here is based on merit rather than favoritism. The fact that someone who made such serious mistakes could redeem themselves through sustained effort and learning gives me confidence that this is a place where people can grow and improve. These comments reflected exactly the kind of workplace culture that Thompson Industries had always aspired to create, one where people were evaluated based on their contributions rather than their connections, where mistakes were learning opportunities rather than career-ending failures, and where sustained effort and practical competence were rewarded with increasing responsibility and recognition. 5 years after Rachel's disastrous tenure as CEO, Thompson Industries was recognized by the Colorado Business Journal as one of the state's most successful family-owned businesses. The article highlighted our operational excellence, employee retention, customer loyalty, and innovative approach to knowledge sharing through training programs. The article included interviews with several employees who discussed the company's commitment to second chances and continuous improvement. Rachel was quoted as saying, "Thompson Industries taught me that business success comes from understanding practical realities rather than implementing theoretical solutions. The most valuable knowledge is developed through direct experience and sustained relationship building, not through academic study or consultant recommendations." The quote perfectly captured the wisdom Rachel had gained through her difficult learning experience, and it represented a complete transformation from the arrogant overconfidence that had nearly destroyed the company she now helped to lead. That evening, Dad, Rachel and I had dinner together at the family home, celebrating both Thompson Industries' recognition and Rachel's personal journey from failure to redemption. The conversation was relaxed and comfortable in a way that hadn't been possible during the crisis years when family relationships had been strained by professional conflicts. "I'm proud of both of you," Dad said, raising his glass in a toast. "Alex, you saved the company when it needed saving, and you gave Rachel the opportunity to prove that people can learn from their mistakes. Rachel, you had the courage to acknowledge your failures and the persistence to earn your way back through hard work and genuine learning." "We all learned from the experience," I responded. "I learned about crisis management and the importance of preserving institutional knowledge. Rachel learned about operational excellence and practical business wisdom. Thompson Industries learned about resilience and the value of second chances." Rachel nodded, her expression mixing gratitude with the quiet confidence that came from earned competence rather than assumed authority. "The most important thing I learned was that leadership isn't about implementing your vision for how things should work. It's about understanding how things actually work and helping them work better. Real business wisdom comes from experience, relationships, and practical problem solving, not from academic theories or consultant methodologies." As we finished dinner and reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point, I realized that Rachel's story had become something more significant than a simple tale of professional redemption. It had become a demonstration of the principles that made Thompson Industries successful: practical competence over theoretical knowledge, sustained effort over quick solutions, relationship building over efficiency optimization, and personal growth over ego protection. Rachel had fired me for being a worthless burden who couldn't adapt to modern business practices, but her attempt to replace practical wisdom with consultant-driven innovation had nearly destroyed everything our family had built. Only when she accepted the humility to learn from people who actually understood the business was she able to contribute to its success. The irony was perfect, but the outcome was better than revenge. Instead of simply proving Rachel wrong, we'd helped her become someone who could contribute to preventing other companies from making the same mistakes. Instead of punishing her failures, we'd created an opportunity for her to share the wisdom she'd gained through those failures. Thompson Industries thrived not because we'd eliminated the person who had nearly destroyed it, but because we'd helped that person learn to contribute to building something better. Sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't retaliation, but transformation, and sometimes the most satisfying victory isn't defeating your enemies, but helping them become allies. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.